Oh, probably. Hello. No, you can't sit beside me. She hates me normally. I'm not the person that she likes in this house. Hello. Can you stop sniffing?
Awesome, that's us. We're here live on YouTube. The four of us.
I'm not the person that she likes in this house.
What a wonderful way to start. This
awesome,
is
that's us.
Goodness.
We're here.
Sorry, I have some feedback from YouTube.
The four of us.
Oh wow.
Terrifying. There we go.
There we go. Don't want to hear our voices ever again. Good. Okay, so hello, I'm Tom Sargent. I'm the artistic director at Car Crash Productions, and welcome back to our Dangerous Dialogues. And I'm joined by two wonderful people who are about to introduce themselves in a second, because they'll do it much better than I can. But just if you don't know who I am, I've kind of said what I do. I'm here because I am autistic. And I have ADHD, which means that I'm usually on the ceiling, but today I'm on the floor. And I'm super dyslexic. Just going to chuck that in the mix. Just a good old pot of dyslexia. I can't spell anything. So if you ever see anything on Car Crash's pages and you go, well, that's not spelt right, it was me that posted it. And if it's spelt right, it was Colby that posted it, who's not here today. So that's me. I'm going to chuck us over to Hannah, who will say who she is.
So I'm Hannah. I run a company called Not Your Gramdmas. I am also Not Your Gramdmas UK on Instagram. I do disability education through cartoons. And I break down the barriers and the things that we don't normally talk about within disability.
Awesome. And Amy?
Hello, I'm Amy and I'm an actor and I've got pelvic adhesive disease, that's a mouthful, which basically just means that all my organs like to sort of touch each other and not come apart, and they just like cause me problems, so that's fun. But yeah, that's me.
Smashing. Always good for friendly organs. We love a friendly organ. So today our conversation is kind of focused on disability and what that means. And I think that is a really great place to start, is what disability is to each one of us, and I guess what that means personally to us. So I'm gonna chuck that straight over to Hannah. I can see you going, oh no, not me first. But
No, it's fine. So for me, disability, I mean, it was really difficult for me. I actually had to Google, am I disabled now, to find out that I was disabled, because nobody thought to tell me. I always assumed that you'd get handed a blue badge, but no. So for me, disability is very much that thing of if it's something that has affected you for more than 6 months, it affects your daily life. That can be anything from mental health to, a physical or other kind of illness. So that's really what disability means to me, I think.
Nice. And what for you, Amy?
That's a tough question. I think it probably means something different to everyone, which is why there's so much confusion all the time. But I would say as a general rule, it's just anything that means that you have to alter your way of living compared to an average person. So like, even if that's just mildly how you navigate your life, or if it's, you've got a massive physical disability and it really affects your everyday life, then, it affects people differently. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting because I guess like both of you, I had to sit and think, what is disability?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite a loaded word because it covers so many things. And I think you've both just given much better definitions than I will ever find online. But I guess it's because to me, it is literally about that personal experience. And it's interesting, last week when we were talking about body image, we kind of thought of it from the perspective of this is my lived experience, but then people have a perception of that as well that is, I guess, as valid as a thing, sort of how I perceive your body, how you perceive mine. And I guess a lot of that comes with disability too, is this is how I perceive your disability, and this is how I perceive my own disability. And I think potentially that's where there's a clash.
Yeah. I think even when people are labelled under having the same disability, they have wildly different experiences of how that affects them. So like to autistic people, massively different. They're never the same. I don't think anyone's ever actually got the same disability. Even when they're given the same label, it just doesn't happen. You hear such different stories from people.
But do you not think that plays into the medical and social models of disability though? So it depends on really your lived experience, but also those around you and how accessible your world is to you, you know, whether you get the right help, whether you are funded in the right way, whether you get, you know, even if down to just getting benefits is so difficult because you have another person judging what is disability. You can't, it's very difficult because it's a mixture of different things. It's also your lived experience, how much ableism you have, who your parents are, the area that you live in. You know, for me at the moment, I'm stuck in an area where I don't count as someone who's vulnerable enough to get the jab, but my doctor was like, just stay inside because we know you're vulnerable. So it's that kind of, and that's postcode lottery. You know, my disability is affected by where I live and what healthcare I even have access to.
Yeah, I think you're right. The socioeconomic nature of where you are makes a massive difference to how disabled you find yourself, you know, like what you have access to, how people treat you around you, that kind of thing. You're totally right. Yeah.
And I think it's a reflection of kind of even down to the mentality, like internalized ableism. That is something I had to do a lot of work on when I was learning about being disabled, because I think what's really important to understand is that 80% of us aren't born disabled. So a lot of people grow up with the mentality of a non-disabled person, and they then have to learn what that means and then kind of move on from there and kind of work that out. And it's really difficult because you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you're sometimes then put on a pedestal to then describe what disability is. And you're like, no one taught me. I have no clue.
I know. You're so right though. The funny thing is I find that anyone disabled, including myself, that I know is always comparing themselves to themselves before. And it's so stupid because you're like, well, you're not you before, so it doesn't make any sense. But you can't help but be like, but I used to be able to do that, why can't I do it now? Like stuff.
And then it's really different for people who, like, I know a lot of people who were born with their disability, but because their parents didn't understand disability or weren't disabled themselves, that majorly affected the way that they moved in disability circles, because they didn't have a connection to the disability community. And by not having that, they also aren't taught how to be disabled. I think there's this massive gap in knowledge. It's why I started doing educating on disability, because there's just this whole gap where everyone's like, oh, what do you do? What does it mean to be disabled? Who is disabled? What does it count? You know, and it isn't just what the government says is disabled in terms of who they will give benefits to, you know?
No, that's silly. When they give you the tick boxes for benefits, you're like, these are so vague and it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, my favorite thing is, because I have fibro, one of the diagnostic criteria for it is a picture of a human, and you have to draw where it hurts. I'm sorry, but if that's the level that we're starting off at,
you're like, everywhere this body
colored it in and was like, get all of it, not just you know. And it's like, well, you know, if that's the level we're starting, you know, I think we have this idea when you're not disabled that disability is much more structured, that that someone will give you advice, that you'll be told when you're disabled. Someone might give you a blue badge. I wasn't even told I was entitled to one. I didn't know I could claim the benefits that I can now claim. I didn't understand what it was to be disabled. I had to learn all of it. Like, I've even had conversations with people about learning how to use a wheelchair. I mean, and people just think that disability is so structured. They think that you'd get all the help and that you instantly get it. And then you have the whole benefit scroungers like idea of that, and that it's so easy to get. It's just not the case, you know?
No.
Absolutely. And I think the core of all this is the thought that actually it's the person before the disability. And it is regardless of what diagnosis you do or don't have, or whether you are like neurotypical or normal, for want of a better word. I guess the stat that really stuck with me that you just said is that 80% of people are born with a disability. That's normal. That's the biggest percentage. But I guess the kind of the thing that changes us all is the things we have access to. As you say, for me, I know I'm incredibly lucky because my mum's a social worker. She's a social work. I guess I had access to her, and she really wanted to understand me and work with me from a young age. And I am incredibly privileged 27 years into my life that I understand myself quite well because of her and both my parents. You know, I can't downplay what my dad's done as well, but other people don't necessarily have that support network that's accessible to them.
Yeah.
I think so many people's experience as well is that, especially when they become disabled, the people around them don't want to accept that. It's very difficult to suddenly see someone not be able to do the things that you thought they could. I mean, it's hard enough when you're the person going through it and you kind of have to learn all of that. But then not only there's this extra layer to disability where you actually have to teach those around you what disability actually means and what happens when you become disabled. Which I think is that extra layer of why it's so difficult to talk about and why it's so difficult to define, like your question in the beginning, how do you define disability and why it's so different for everybody, is because of those layers that happen.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think I'm finding out more recently that so for a while when in my life I'm recently disabled, not that recently, but in my lifespan I am. And I think for me, I was always like, why do people around me not understand what I need and stuff? And it was kind of because, and this is going to sound dead cheesy, but I hadn't accepted myself. Like I hadn't decided, no, but I am disabled. Like I wouldn't even use that word even a year ago, probably. I would be like, I'm not doing that call. I'm not disabled. I've just got a little thing wrong with my stomach. Like, but when it's actually huge. And now that I admit, like, I'm like, look, this is what I need. Now everybody's on board. And it's funny because I think sometimes you expect people to keep up with you and you can't even keep up with what you need, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's such a valid point. I think, I mean, it's the same with anything beyond kind of disability. Acceptance of you and who you are and what that is really hard. You're never really taught to kind of self-reflect, I guess, and understand you. It's all about kind of, oh, this is a thing and you understand this, but you forget about me, the person I'm trying to understand. I mean, on job application forms until literally about 6 months ago would still not even tick the disability box. Because I was always told as a kid, oh, if you tick the disabled box, you get an interview. And I was like, oh, but I want to earn that interview. I don't want it because I'm disabled. I want it because I'm good at what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, because of the industry we work in, it was weird. Like I was like, I can't let people know I'm disabled because no one will hire me as an actor. It'll be too difficult for them. Yeah. And then I think I got to a stage where I was like, do you know what? If someone's not, I mean, for me, the only accommodation I need is that sometimes I need the toilet more often than other people, is just unfortunately the case. So I've always thought, if people don't want to work with you because you need the toilet a few more times than the other actors, then they're not really the kind of people you want to work with anyway. So you're better off without them. Just work with people that understand and don't mind like putting up with that, because it's at the end of the day, it's only a few jobbies a day. It's fine. So,
you say jobby in Glasgow?
Say jobby.
Jobby?
English people watching this are like, a jobby? Google it. It's fine.
Well, I might not want to Google it.
Oh Lord.
I mean, I guess it's something we kind of touched on there, but the thought of the outside perception of what your disability is and what your requirements are versus your own acceptance of what that is and your verbalization of saying, this is actually what I need. Because I guess, I mean, we kind of talked about wheelchairs there. I guess as a person, you see a wheelchair and you go, oh, that's you have something with your back, or it's like you can't use the lower half of your body for some reason. But I think instinctively you go, oh, that's a wheelchair user. And you don't think that actually there could be so much more to that.
It's like if you've ever seen when someone gets, I've had a few friends that have a wheelchair, but they don't need it all the time. And they'll like get to the car in the wheelchair and then they'll stand up and people are like, Jesus, they can't believe it.
I used to do it where I like one of the times I went around the Guinness factory and I was using a wheelchair. But for me, it's a long distance to go around, so it was a lot easier. And I literally moved my legs at one point and I saw this guy being like, oh, and I was like, it's a miracle. Because I just couldn't help it. You know, when you're just like, I'm just going to make this more awkward. Like, I'm just going to, if you're going to react that way, I might as well play on it. I can't help myself sometimes. I think for me, it took a very long time to get used to that. Like, I hid my disability in work for the first year and my friends would like hide my disability because I was worried I'd lose my job. So my friends would go and walk downstairs or whatever. And I basically used my office chair as a makeshift wheelchair and I would wheel around the office. And that was the way I did it. But then the first day I turned up with a walking stick, it was the way that people changed around me that I found the most difficult. It was the conversation went from me being this person who was considered to be, you know, I worked in TV, I was quite good at my job, you know, I was efficient as a person, and then it was, can you do this? Can you manage this? Like when I went on location, it would be, can you actually do this? Can you stand this? Or, you know, those questions would come up, or they praise me for turning up to work. They'd be like, oh, well done for getting in today. And I'd be like, I'm sorry, you didn't praise me before I had a walking stick. Like, please do. I mean, praise me all the time. That's great. But, you know, why are you changing the way that you behave? And I think our experience of disability and what it means, again, it's the way people react to you, and it changes almost in every single situation, because it depends on those people, or how you feel that day, whether you can cope with that kind of question, because sometimes it's incredibly, especially if you've had it 4 or 5 times that day, it's very difficult being more visibly disabled. And I think my experience of then going into a wheelchair as well was very much, you get different levels of how people treat you. Like once I sat in a wheelchair, I hadn't realized how much people just thought I was invisible. Like they couldn't cope with looking at me or talking to me, so they would talk to my partner who was wheeling me, and I'd be like, I'm a competent person, like you can ask me questions like, how's she doing today? I'm right here. Like, hi. You know, and that's why I started, like I basically have a walker that I spray painted bubblegum pink with leopard print because I'm so fed up of people asking me. And do you know what? They changed the way they spoke to me. They were like, oh my God, that's so cool. And they wouldn't ask me what was wrong with me.
That's, sorry, I'm processing that information.
It's a lot.
I think, you know, there's so much to take away from that. I guess one thing I'm specifically interested in is the difference between visible and invisible kind of disabilities, because I think for a visible disability you are treated very differently, which is what you've just said. But I think it's you kind of have to wear it on your sleeve, literally, because it's there, right? I don't know. Is that right?
Yeah. I think it's difficult. I mean, obviously I can't speak because I'm not always, I don't always sit in the visible disability, and obviously there's a spectrum within that as well. And obviously I have a privilege where at times I can hide it, which again makes my experience very different. And I think it's important to highlight that. But I do think that, I don't know, I think it's very difficult sometimes to wear it on your sleeve, because when you're that visible all the time, the way that people treat you very much changes. I've had people come up to me and say things like, I'm so sorry. Complete strangers in the middle of the, you know, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I've had them ask for my medical records. I've also had people be very derogatory towards me and do things that make me feel very unsafe as a disabled person. And you've got to look at that, you know, especially disabled women, but disabled people in general are highly more vulnerable to, you know, attacks and things like that. Not just because of their physical issues, but statistically speaking,
Right.
they're more likely to be abused or attacked, especially for being visibly disabled. And we don't talk enough about the violence against people who are disabled and visibly so.
And I mean, from your perspective, is that because people see something like a walker or wheelchair or walking stick and go, oh, you're vulnerable, you're easy?
I don't think it's so much that you're vulnerable. I think a lot of it is not understanding.
Right.
And so I cannot explain how people, they get very fidgety around disability. I mean, that's obviously what you're talking about here, is that they get very fidgety about how you deal with that, because they're not trained or taught how to deal with disability.
Right.
We don't think about it, and we don't understand the layers, like you said earlier. Like, there are people who don't need wheelchairs all the time. You know, ambulatory wheelchairs, ambulatory wheelchair users are very much at that risk level because people get annoyed because they don't understand it, and that's, you know.
Yeah. But it's from a lack of like talking about it, you know, that they just don't have the sympathy or the understanding for it. Because like you said, like before, when I got before I became disabled, I actually had cancer, which is what caused my organs to have the whole drama. But when I was like bald and walking about the shop like chemo-y looking, people would treat me completely different, because you look visibly unwell, so I feel a wee bit sorry for you. It would be that kind of thing. Whereas like now you can't see my illness, it's like people haven't got a clue like what you're meant to do about it. And especially see having an illness that's like, it's funny because like when I had cancer, as I say, people would be like, oh, that's a shame, which was annoying. Whereas now though, it's like, okay, well, what have you got wrong with you? And I explain, and they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about toilet things, so I'm really uncomfortable. They don't like talking about stuff like that. So it makes them all like, and it stops people learning, because there's so many disabilities that involve that kind of area, for example, and people just get uncomfortable and they just can't handle it. Like,
everybody does it. You know, we're 20 minutes in and we've already talked about jobbies. So
I get the conversation down quite happily.
No, not at all. But that's it. I guess you think all the things that come with certain disabilities, and I guess there is an association of dirtiness potentially. You know, even, can you wash yourself? Do you need extra assistance on certain things? And it's like, I'm still a capable human. I still know how to function, and
I don't get it.
There's, of course, as you say, there's levels of that. But there's an awareness, I would say, of that from the person. They understand sometimes, not all the time, what is happening with their body. See, this is it. This is right back to our start of the conversation where we said it's such a broad thought, disability. It's really hard to make a sweeping statement like I'm trying to, when actually, you know, it's a spectrum, isn't it? It really is.
But it's not just because, again, like there's elements of privilege and things like that. Like, obviously, like where I was like, I can hide my disability. That's part of a privilege. It's really hard to talk about bits and be a voice of being disability, because it's so individual. Like we said at the beginning, it's so specific to your experience. It's like, I used to be terrified when doing educating, because I was always like, how do I break this down in a way that people understand, but also that I constantly remind people this is mostly from my experience. Like,
you're scared in case you're always going to tread on someone's toes. It's never going to fit everybody. It just can't. It just can't do that. And some people get really mad about that, but you just have to be like, look, I'm trying my best. It's better that we talk about it at all than we don't talk about it ever, in case it offends them.
That's what stops people having literally the conversation that we're having at the moment, is fear. Because they think, I'm going to offend someone. And actually, if it's said in a non-malicious way, then there's no malintent. It's fine. You can say the wrong thing. You're allowed to, and go, oh, that's the wrong thing. I'm sorry. And you learn from that. I mean, we literally learn from our mistakes, do we not?
And we'll laugh it off as well. Like, it's funny sometimes when people make a mistake. Like, see, when so I'm getting a stoma bag soon. Yay, because I'll finally feel a lot better. But that's already invited the funniest conversations ever, because my friend turned to me and was like, oh, you'll never need to sit on a toilet again. How weird's that? And I was like, how do you think I'm going to pee? She was like, like, for God's sake. So it's worth a laugh.
About why you, like, no. It's like, not how it works. But then it is that thing. I also feel that we're quite divided in the community as well, and I think that also has its own issues within there, because I think people can try and be quite black and white about topics, and I think when we get like that unfortunately creates this environment where people who are non-disabled come in and like, what the fuck is going on here? And they're all fighting, and we're all fighting, going, what, no, you should use this language, or no, I prefer person first, or I prefer identity first, like, you know. And it's just like, well, actually it makes that extra barrier for people to understand, because they freak out, because they're like, I don't know how to get this right. And people are so fixated on being right about disability, rather than just being like, I don't understand your disability, could you help me understand?
Exactly. I mean, if they could see what happens on, see those, like, I don't know if you guys are involved in any forums or Facebook pages for your illnesses, disabilities. There's arguments on them like every day about minute details of disabilities, and I'm like, oh guys, we just need to calm down. Oh man,
to that point. And it's like, and I understand, because a lot of the time what people forget is, especially people in my condition where, you know, I'm chronically ill, I have a lot of time on my hands, like a lot of time. I am on the sofa most of the day. So you can understand why people get very irate about certain bits of things and how it's spoken about, because this is their lived experience. They have sometimes no other way of communicating with the outside world. It is always through those forums, and they're the only places where they're even vaguely understood. And so you kind of have to understand, and I think because we don't talk about it, you don't understand that background, so you don't understand why these things happen, and it's really difficult. And I don't think there's an easy way forward. It's like when I started saying that, you know, it's actually completely impossible to be fully accessible. That's a great one if you want to get yelled at about things. Because it is completely impossible, because some accessibility will clash. You know, someone who has sensory processing issues needs a quieter space, but someone who's deaf needs sound so that they can understand what's going on, and those access needs clash. And I think what we don't talk about enough within disability is the fact that actually there is no right way with this. There is a finding a way and working together, and to be fully accessible is to understand that it has to be catered to the individual.
Absolutely.
Well, I've never even thought about that. That's actually crazy. It's so true. You literally can't make a shop or a restaurant or a supermarket, whatever, like fit everybody, because it's not going to happen. Like,
it's really interesting. I do know a lot of teaching at the moment, because there's not a lot of work in directing right now. Anyway, in the kind of classes that I have, there's some real kind of mixes of individuals, which is great. But there's one class specifically that comes to mind where there are 3 or 4 individuals where their needs specifically clash. And it's, of course, it's like music and drama I'm doing with them. It's quite a loud subject. There's no way to play drums quietly, really. I'm sure someone would argue that, but I was gonna say, at the end of the day, when you kind of have kids that need to like physically get that kind of rage out, you do it, go for it. But then other kids get a kind of sensory overload, but they should also be involved in the class. Of course they should, but it's balancing all of those individual needs. It's hard. It is really hard. And you're absolutely right. There is no right way to do that. You just have to do your damnedest. And if you do, then you can
only try your best, and then people can't, or they shouldn't get mad at you if you're trying, if you're really genuinely trying. Like at the school, I work at a school as well, like part-time, and what we do is, because there's so many kids at the school that have different disabilities and needs and stuff, we have this like one room that they can go to anytime they want, where they feel overwhelmed or not understood or something's going on, and they just go there, and it means that we can go and go like, how can I help you? Like if everywhere was just like that, it would be helpful, because you can't, like you say, you can't make every room and every activity totally perfect for everyone in the room.
It's why when I talk to businesses, I say the one thing you can do to be really accessible is put up a little bit on your page, on your business page, on your website that just says accessibility, and then says, if we have not covered any of the access needs that you have, please get in touch with us.
Yeah.
That's it. It doesn't need to be expensive, doesn't need to have to be something really complex. You don't have to think ahead or pre-plan it. You can just say, get in touch with us, and then make sure that you actually answer the emails, because there are people who do that and don't.
That's half the battle, yeah.
Don't get me started on the number of things. Also tell me how many stairs are there. I'm sorry, just tell me.
That's such, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I'm going to kind of change the topic entirely. I think kind of something that we're starting to move towards is people's perception and view of various things. And I love that we do live in a world where businesses and things are really, some of them, not all of them, are really trying to move towards accessibility and whatever that means. And that's great. But I think the media, the industry that we're kind of all in, theatre and kind of film and television and all that, it's maybe got a little bit to go, I would say. But I don't know. I'm not the oracle of all on that. I think there's incredible television shows that come to mind, like Special on Netflix, which was written by a disabled actor. He's the star of it as well. And it's a really short run series. There's going to be a second, and that's the end. And in that series, he specifically talks about something we literally just talked about, which is him in his workplace not wanting to identify as disabled. And he says, I got hit by a car. And that's the sort of start of his story. And I don't know, it's just so interesting to hear a disabled person say that, because that is also his actual life that it's based on. It's his experiences. And I think, where am I going with this? I don't know. Are we saying that? So I think the big kind of topic of 2021 in terms of movies and things was Sia's movie, and the things that came with that. I'm sure we all have opinions on it, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of television shows where people play disabled roles, and I'm very much in two minds. It's wonderful to see characters on the television. The one I always think of is in Glee, of Artie in the wheelchair. And Kevin McHale's brilliant, but he's not a wheelchair user. I guess it's a two-edged prong with representation, isn't it? But I don't know. I'm interested in others' thoughts on that.
I always find myself really in the middle of that, because on one hand, as an actor, I'm like, you should be able to play lots of different roles. And like, if you're thinking of the theory of everything, I was like, oh, he's amazing at that part, and I can see why they chose him. But then the other half of the coin is, I'm like, there's so little casting for people that have disabilities, especially really obvious physical disabilities, that I'm like, well, just cast them, because they don't get as much chance. But then I'm like, oh, but maybe if we just cast anyone as any part and there was more disabled people throughout, then that would be okay. And I'm just like, it feels like an explosion in my brain. I can't decide like what the right thing to do is. But the wrong thing is Sia's movie. So
I love it. Period.
I can't decide. I'm just like I don't know. It's all very individual. It seems to depend on the very specific circumstances of each thing. What I decide, I think, is right, which I know is not helpful. Like, that's all I can.
It's right, though, isn't it? To say the individual side, isn't that what we're saying? Is that it is an individual thing each time? Like, I do a lot of, not for TV, but I do a lot of reading for books, for children's books with disability, and I basically read them to check whether they are actually showing a real, because if they're written by someone who isn't disabled, I check to make sure that they're making sure that they hit the right things, so that kids are getting a good representation of disability. And I think if we took that approach with TV and film more, it wouldn't matter who the actor was. Yes, I think it's important that we have more disabled actors.
Agreed.
But at the same time, if we're trying to get more representation, and it just so happens that that's the way the industry works as well, some of it might be that we infiltrate that way.
It's really interesting, because I think the parts have to exist first, obviously. So I mean, they need to be written, and I guess I wonder, can I don't really know the answer to this. I'm just kind of throwing it into the ether. Does a part have to be written as a disabled part?
I don't think it should have to be. Like, I think casting people should open their minds more and go, does it matter if the person's in a wheelchair? Does it matter if that person has one leg? Who cares? It's always been like, and this is a weird comparison, but I used to be obese. A lot has happened in my life, but I used to be really obese, and I was always like, why did I have to write bigger characters being like, oh, it's all about my weight and I'm really sad? Well, it's the same with like any disability. I'm like, why does it have to be about the fact they're in a wheelchair? Maybe you just don't mention that, because like any friend I've ever met in a wheelchair doesn't talk about their wheelchair all day, so they could be any part. Like, I just think it should be more open as in a general rule, unless there's some really good reason why a part couldn't be disabled, which I think would be hard to find. Then I think they should just open it up to everybody.
Yeah.
Why not?
I think that's such a thing. I mean, everyone lives their life, and that sounded like it was either incredibly profound or really stupid. But I guess, you know, it's so true. I don't go about every day being like, by the way, babe, me, this is who I am. These are my labels. These are all my labels. I don't talk about that very often. It's nice to talk about it, and I feel like this is where if you've written a character that you go, oh, actually that actor really suits this part, then who gives a fuck if there's this, that, or the next thing? If they really suit that part, then great, go for it. And maybe further down the road, if it's a long running thing, maybe there is a conversation at some point, but it doesn't have to be.
Another conversation about the fact that they're not even getting in the door in the first place. Like, I mean, you talk about accessibility in theatres. How many stages have wheelchair access?
So true. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that, you know, it's not even set up. The industry's not even set up for them to be actually, you know, we're saying you could be disabled and there's no reason as to why there couldn't be a disabled actor, but actually sometimes getting on set is the reason why. And I think it falls into that larger understanding of disability and understanding that there are things that we have to do as a society to make disability. And one of my favorite things is to explain that disability is the largest group that you can become at any time. You know, disability will happen to you at some point, because as we age, the percentage chance of disability happening to us increases quite significantly. So it's not a case of if you would ever become disabled, it's a case of when you become disabled.
Right.
And so if we start thinking as a society of it like that, we would build a society that allows people access in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that, that's really interesting, that thought that at some point you probably will have some level of a disability in your life. And I don't know, I come back to what you said earlier about more of us do than don't have some disability. And it's strange to me that we don't talk about that. I just as a young person in education going, well, what is a disability? And I know that's a hard question because we started with it and we were all like, I think it's, to me, instinctively, when you say disability, the two images that come into my head are someone in a wheelchair and someone that's old. And as we've discussed, there's much more of a spectrum to that. But that's really interesting. I've not thought about that before, that just sort of the aging process is debilitating, literally. Yeah. I
like scaring non-disabled people with it. I'm like, by the way, just so you know, this will happen to you.
Absolutely.
And at least I will be faster with my walker than you will be. I've had more time to train.
Well, I guess if people have these conversations and they're not scared of that, it's easier to deal with. You know, if you accept something, it's easier to deal with a lot quicker.
If you think about it, they're only scared because they immediately go, oh, life would be so hard. Like, they shouldn't be scared. That's the point. They should go, oh, well, it's a bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas they're like, oh my God, my whole life would change, but I shouldn't have to. Really?
Yeah.
There we go. Mic drop. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. I think kind of jumping back to the thought on schools and the education that you receive. I mean, learning is a lifelong process, and we should always be trying to encourage ourselves to learn more. I mean, I've learned so much tonight just from having a chat. But I specifically think about with kids about when I was younger, schools were less integrated, and now schools are a little more integrated. And I think that's wonderful, because there's a lot of classes that have young people with whatever disability or kind of learning issues that they have, and they're more aware of that now than I think my generation were. But I guess that, as we talked about earlier, comes with difficult learning intentions that potentially clash. So I don't know what the right answer is to that. I don't know that there is a right answer to that.
No, but you're right. It's everything's built on the foundation of what you're taught when you're young. So like, even if you think about something as minute as like, you know, the disabled toilet, it doesn't happen very often as much as it used to, but it has like a wheelchair sign person on it, like, or it used to always do that. And you're like, it's for people with wheelchairs. Where now I walk into it and people are like, you don't have a wheelchair. And I'm like, yes, but I'm going to be in here a while. I've got a bowel problem. They don't get that. And it's getting better, like, because they're changing those little things. It's those tiny parts of society. If you just get rid of that, a whole layer of it comes away, and we can open up our minds to what actually being disabled is.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a thought. Oh no. How do we, as a generation, think better about disability? That was pretty much the most dyslexic sentence I've said all day. How do we think better about, you know, also working in East London, it's terrible. You're just like, how do I think better? But anyway, please forget that I just did a terrible sort of East London accent. Let's never speak of that again. I know this is live and I know you can watch it back, but...
And it never happened, it's fine.
How do we move towards a better world, I guess, is that question. That is the hardest question I've ever asked in my life.
I think just talk. I think it's as simple as always be talking about the things that we're not meant to talk about. And even that goes beyond disability, just in general, it would make life so much easier if we all just spoke about the stuff we're not speaking about, because we spend so much of our time going, oh gosh, I need to keep that in and be normal so nobody thinks I stand out, and it's just so stupid. Whereas like if we just spoke about things, people would know more. Like, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I talk about something to do with my disability or my illness or whatever, with somebody, they always leave, like they don't leave in a weird note. They're like, thank you, I didn't know that. Like, so if we were all doing that all the time, we'd know loads. So yeah, just not being scared to talk about it.
I think also listening as well. Like quite often with disability, people will talk over you and kind of tell you how to be disabled. Like I think a lot of, you know, unfortunately, people who work in disability who are not disabled themselves, that they're all taught, like my friend's doing a course at the moment, and she's being taught to use person first language, whereas most of the disability community prefer, you know, identity first, so saying I am disabled rather than saying a disabled person. And again, like you said, it's that little change that's really important, and actually all you have to do is ask that person, do you prefer identity first or person first language? That's it.
Yeah.
Listen to the response and follow their lead.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how change happens with anything in the world, right? I mean, we're on here, we all have our pronouns written, and that would not have happened 5 years ago. But that's a change that has been made now, that we go, okay, well, this is me, this is who I identify as. And I don't think it should be any different for where you identify on gender spectrums and sexuality spectrums of, well, this is who I am as a person, more than just my gender and sexuality. And you're allowed to listen, and I'm allowed to chat about it. Yeah, because I think people will, going back to us all kind of having this hidden moment about disability, right? And saying that in workplaces, sometimes we don't identify ourselves immediately because of those preconceptions that come with that. I guess by making the step of saying to people and saying, yes, this is me, these are the labels that I have, and that's what they mean to me, other people will then open up and kind of have that experience. I mean, I have all the people that I work with in schools, I've never said to them anything about sort of, oh, well, you know, I'm on the spectrum and, you know, I'm a little bit hyper as well. And I'm sure there's whatever plagues them that they've never said to me before, because sometimes you don't need to necessarily. I mean, this is the opposite end of kind of what we're talking about. Do you always have to go, hello, I'm Tom, these are my pronouns, these are my disabilities?
No, I mean, I don't feel like you need to lead with it, but I just think whenever the conversation goes that way, instead of doing that thing what I have been guilty of doing in the last few years, where I would be like, oh, I'm not going to say that, that's too much. Like, I can't just tell them that actually I'm going to be a real life shite bag. That's what I say to people now. I'm going to be a real life shite bag soon because I'll actually have one. Now I'm like, just say it. Like, who cares? You know, when it comes to that in a conversation, like, I'm sure it'd be weird if you just met someone and was like, hi, I've got a bag of shit strapped to me right now. They'd be like, okay, that's crazy. So I think it's probably just knowing your time, but when the time comes, just go for it. Don't be scared to go for it, you know?
I think the other thing
Easy said than done.
We should maybe add is, because we're all speaking from a place where, or I'm making an assumption here, that none of us are people of color, or we're not Black, and there's the intersectionality that comes into this. And I think there is an argument, whereas especially people from those communities can't necessarily always speak up because there is a stigma based around disability in those communities. So I suppose it's worthwhile for us to highlight that in this conversation, that we are talking from that kind of slight place of privilege, in the sense that we are able to identify as being disabled, and to do so relatively safely. Obviously, going back to the whole statistical thing, you know, disabled people are more likely to be abused and things like that. So but we have a relative privilege in being able to say and identify as disabled. So I think it's also, there's twofold to that. In one sense, yes, we need to speak about it more, and we need to use our privilege to speak about it. But the other side of it is that allowing people who have intersectionality, so people who come from different groups, who might be disabled and Black, or they might be, you know, from other different types of groups mixed in with, you know, that kind of levels of privilege, I think is really important to be aware of when we're speaking of it, because obviously we're all speaking from one particular.
Of course.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And like we said at the start, we can only speak from our point of view.
Yeah.
I don't know. It will be different for different people, but I do think at the end of the day, if we're speaking about it, then maybe in a weird grand sense, the more people that speak about it, the more it will make that seem acceptable in other cultures and other places, and maybe it'll filter down eventually. I mean, I feel like you can only help as much as you can, you know, you can only do what you can do to help, and hopefully that does help a bit, you know.
And I think it's
something that's spoken about on the news all the time, like people just talk about it like it's everyday life, then people in some cultures will get over that later on. They'll just, well, I hope.
I think also, like, using our privilege in terms of highlighting those issues and saying, look, there are issues here that other people may not be able to be in a position to speak up, and shouldn't feel the need, you know. I'm identified first. I will say that I'm disabled. I don't mind saying I'm disabled. I'm quite proud of that, you know, but, you know, some people don't get to do that. And you also need to, there's also that kind of part of not outing someone as being disabled. So if you're non-disabled and you're aware someone's disabled and they haven't said it, you don't want to be going, oh, you're disabled, or oh, by the way, so-and-so is disabled, because there's also that other level of, there may be other reasons why they might have to hide that. And we've obviously talked about it in terms of a work context. All of us have hidden it at some point, right? So like, it's that kind of level of like, well, could that person be hiding it for a reason because they may feel in their job, or, you know, there is kind of, again, all those layers, isn't it, of where disability intersects.
I love that idea of outing someone. I don't love that idea. Sorry, that was poorly. I'm like, oh, I'm so obsessed with it. No. But that's it's a very real thought, that actually it's not your story to tell. It's somebody else's business. you know, concern yourself with you, but listen to that person, and if they want to tell you, great, but it's not your place to go and tell everyone else. Yeah.
It's also that not entitlement to someone's medical information as well. Like, if just because you can physically see they're disabled, you don't have the right to ask them why they're disabled.
Yeah. That's actually so true, and it happens all the time. Like, when I was going through my chemo, I had these like tubes that were like on me all the time, and I would get in like a taxi and they'd be like, "What are they?" I'm like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
They were tubes. Leave me alone."
My favorite comeback to that is so if we're talking about intimate questions, when was the last time you had sex? They literally fall apart.
We've ventured on to the worlds that I wanted to venture onto next. Sex, because it's Wednesday night, and that's I don't know where I was going with that. I was like, no. The reason I bring it up is because I think there's perhaps a little bit of a stigma in kind of dating world and sex life with disability. I think there's a thought that perhaps they don't necessarily instinctively go together. And I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about. I mean, personally, again, only speaking from my own personal perspective, I don't have on any dating profiles, I don't say, oh, I have this disability, or this is, because I guess I have that privilege, as we've said, that I don't necessarily need to show that. And I honestly, I think there's very close friends that I even know, that I have never physically had that conversation with, because I just don't feel like I need to necessarily. But again, that's because I'm quite privileged that I guess I can hide that. Oh, I don't know if that's a privilege actually to say that I can hide it. Oh wow, I just went through a whole journey of things there.
That is what happens. It's that journey of like, but actually looking from different areas, that could be privilege, but it also could not be seen as privilege. And
I'm sorry, jumping back 7 thoughts in my own head. See, that's the ADHD. I started on one thought and wrote like an entire bibliography of it. I guess what's other people's kind of experiences with that, I guess, kind of from a perspective of like social and I guess more than social, do you out yourself on profiles or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a boyfriend currently. He's great. And when we were on our first date, I was like, right, listen, this is what's going on. This is what happens to me. I need you to know this. And I think the reason that I chose to do that is because I'm like, if you're going to run away, you better run away now, because I can't be bothered investing in you if you're going to just go, you never told me about this. So like, for me, it helps to just be really upfront about it. Like, I mean, obviously it's different if you've got an obvious physical disability. I'm pretty sure you can't hide it and be like, this is just a chair. This isn't a wheelchair. Just ignore the wheels. It's fine. Like, but whereas like I have to like properly out myself. But I even in friendships, I do that as well. Like I'm so bad for it. Like, because I meet someone new, and I think just because it does get in the way of my life, where I'm like, I might need to run to the toilet any minute. I don't want people to be like, what is she doing? Like, why is she running to the toilet like 3 times? I just want to be like, listen, I've got a problem. It's fine. So I think for me, like I say, it's from a personal point of view, that's helped, because being honest means there's none of that anxiety about having to hide things all the time kind of thing. So no one can also blame you for not telling them the truth, because they'll try. And you'll be like, no, I told you. So
I mean, I became disabled so in my relationship, I started off not being disabled,
right?
I became disabled, and we very much went through a journey of both having to learn, because our relationship dynamic completely changed, and at one point he became my carer. So it's incredibly difficult to, I think, to go through that kind of thing. I wouldn't know how it would be to do dating, but I mean, from friends that do, it's not easy. People can be awful. They're bad enough on dating sites anyway.
No.
Yeah. and then you add in a disability. It's not great. But from my point of view, becoming disabled within a relationship was, it's a learning experience. I think it very much changed our relationship. But not necessarily for the bad, it was just relearning how to do things together and how any of that works, you know.
I think that's a really interesting thought about things happening kind of further down the line versus immediately. I guess as you say, you kind of sorry, I say you, there's two of you, I need to be clear. As Amy kind of said, you just kind of go straight to the point, and I guess I'm the opposite, and I think I internally build up a stigma within myself that then I'm gonna have to at some point out to myself by saying, by the way, as if you didn't know already, because I've talked your ear off and incredibly obsessional and routine focused.
And they're just like, I already know. Oh well.
But I think kind of on Hannah's point that it does change the relationship, like regardless of how much people love and want to understand, it will. It's new information changes anything. And yeah, I think, I don't know what I think.
I mean, I know like people ask my partner why he stayed quite a lot, because they were shocked that he would stay with someone who was so sick. He also got praised for being in a relationship, ironically by a therapist at one point. And it is that kind of, there was very much a change, and it was very much like, you know, why would you even want to be with someone who's sick? You know, what can you do with them? It's just like, oh great, thanks. My life is now considered worthless.
But that's it. I mean, it's a relationship. Like it's the two of you together. You're going on the journey together. It's not him and you. It's, you know, it's that literally lived experience with each other. So we all deserve praise, because we all have to put up with people. Because people are exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite good in a way, because like, in a weird way, when you've got like a disability and someone's managed to overcome that with you, it's so deep, your connection, and it's actually really nice, because I don't think I've ever had a relationship with anyone before I was disabled that I felt so much like I can just really trust you, because I've had to trust you in real moments of pain or something awful's happened to me medically, and you can actually see how much I love you, and it's put to the test constantly, which is obviously not, well, you don't want someone to have to be put to the test constantly, but you know, it shows you how deeply rooted you are together, so it can be really good. Yeah.
And I also think you get better at communication, like where my partner became my carer, like we both had to learn to communicate with each other. Like there was no choice. Because how else do you do it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Yeah.
I mean, I guess if there's in relationships an expectation that you will grow together, there's, as you say, kind of with age, the inevitability at some point that something might happen to someone, just even aging, physical ailments of your body, and beyond. That wasn't my receding hairline, sorry.
It's graying.
It was here a year ago. But the mind, that was where I was going with that, to clarify. Yeah, I guess that is marriage, you say, in sickness and health, right? Sickness comes before health in that one. Yeah. Cool. I feel like we're kind of coming to the end of this. So I guess a nice way to wrap this up would be just to kind of say what we feel people should take away from this conversation, if anything. For me, I guess I'll kick us off. I feel like the big thing of today is that whatever labels you put on someone, it's about the person at the end of the day. And if you don't understand, you can ask, you're allowed to ask, because people want to have a conversation and should have a conversation, and there should be nothing stopping you having a conversation. It doesn't need to be an overly personal conversation. Is the kind of where the line is. There's still a line to things. But I think that's my kind of big takeaway from this personally.
I think for me, any parting wisdom that I probably don't have in life would be just to get a little bit braver every day to talk about it on both sides of the coin. Like, you know, obviously, like you say, be appropriate. Don't ask someone a ridiculous question if you've just met them. But, you know, like, be a little bit brave enough to ask your friend that question you might have always wanted to ask them, or whatever. Or if you actually do have a disability, just being every day pushing yourself to, if you feel like it, to try and talk about it, because I think overall, if we're, like I said, if we're always having conversations, it's always going to make it easier for people in the long run. And one day maybe it'll just be normal for people to talk about whatever like they've got wrong going on. So yeah, chat.
I think for me it's like I think one of the nicest things people can do for you is say something like, I looked up your disability. Now you potentially will look up the wrong information, because there's a lot of wrong information out of there. However, it's a great place to start a conversation, because you can be like, I looked it up and I learnt this. And that's so nice to know that someone's thinking of you in that way and kind of trying to understand. And even if you do get it wrong at that point, at least you tried. and I think that's, you know, if you have a friend who's disabled, maybe having a look for, you know, what their disability is and what that means to them, you know, really important.
Awesome. I think that's such a wonderful sentiment to end on. Thank you so much, Hannah and Amy, and thank you anyone that's kind of watching us. I was just like, oh, people are watching? I've just remembered that. And anyone that's watching it on catch up, thank you very much. Great. I think that's us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And cheerio to anyone else. So British, cheerio. Thank you.